Thank you. Yes, so my name is Gustav Amberg. I am the rector of Södertörn University here in Flemingsberg in Stockholm, where we are. I'm very happy to have a chance to welcome you all here this Thursday out of one of the locations for this conference. So, but I'd like to take the opportunity to say just a few things about the place we're in. And so first of all, we are actually in Flemingsberg in Stockholm. And one thing to note is that this is one of the fastest, Stockholm is one of the faster growing cities in Europe. And Flemingsberg is kind of the place where it grows, that places like Flemingsberg. So a lot is being invested and a lot of things are happening here, which makes it a great place to be for a university. We're also on a great campus here where we have one of the main hospitals, Karolinska Hospital on campus, and also the Karolinska Institute, which does research and education in medical and care professions, KTH in technology for medicine and health, KTH, the Royal Institute of Technology. We have the Swedish Red Cross University, the Stockholm Institute for Musical Pedagogy. There's an art school, Idun Lovén, and a number of other actors. So it's a very rich campus and a great place to be, actually. The other thing to note about Flemingsberg is that Stockholm has sort of a north-south issue, if you will, with a more affluent north and a less affluent south. I will get back to that. But about Södertörn, very simply, numbers are, we are now the third largest university in Stockholm by number of students. We educate broadly in social science and humanities. So we educate teachers in business economy, journalists, social workers, police, librarians, etc., as well as students of media technology, media communications theory, environmental studies, also all the core humanities disciplines like history, philosophy, gender studies, art studies, etc. The other thing to note about Södertörn specifically is that we started from scratch in 1996. So we celebrated 25 years birthday last year. And that's very young for a university, especially since we actually started from scratch then. It's a young place, something that I really experience every day. I came here 2016 from the Royal Institute of Technology, which sort of tries to date itself to the early 1800s, and this makes itself felt in many ways. And one thing more to say about this, that when you started the university in 1996, we formulated two missions, which I think are still highly relevant and alive. One is this north-south issue, and it was an obvious motive for establishing a university here is, of course, to contribute to a positive development in this southern part of Stockholm, which I think we still do, and certainly that's one of our main efforts that I think everybody working here really also embraces. Now, the other that was a very current thing in 1996 was that this was just a few years after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dissolution of the Soviet state. So we have a particular research theme directed towards the increase of knowledge on societal change in a broad sense in the Baltic and Eastern European regions. Now, in 1996, that probably had a bit of an optimistic outlook to it, expecting larger growth of more democracy, more freedom, more wealth being created. Now, of course, this theme is more important than ever, but with a more bleak outlook, perhaps. But all the same, over the years, our research has now grown into a rather wide range of disciplines in humanities, social science, and environmental studies. And of course, in all of this, sustainability in all its forms is at its core. I could end by quoting our mission statement. That's a kind of document or statements people usually say, well, we just write it. But I really think it says something that most people working here would agree with, or feel that it captures part of what we're trying to do. So it reads that Södertörn University contributes to sustainable societal development through research, informed citizenship, and critical studies on contemporary challenges. So I don't think I need to sort that out any further. Just note that it resonates very well with the theme of this conference, and sustainable development and courage, culture, art, and human rights. That could be a good mission statement for Södertörn, actually, if we think about it. So again, I will finish right there, and thank you for your attention, and wish you very, very nice, great Thursday and continuation of the conference. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning, everyone. We are, of course, very happy to see so many here finding your way from the city center. I hope you're feeling well. The night yesterday when we left the golden room of the City Hall was just lovely. So I understand that some of you went on and bar hopping a bit. Glad to see you here after that. I would like to just start this morning on another note. We will have some information, and we have the panel very eager to be discussing the topics of this morning, the role of art in climate transformation. But here, just on another note, we have welcomed you to Stockholm. Obviously, you're in a lovely capital, in the lovely capital of Sweden. The national borders of Sweden have been like this for more than 200 years, placed on top of the Sápmi people's land in the north of Finland, Sweden, Norway. And I hereby just want to honor the right of the Sápmi indigenous people to their land, to cultivate it with reindeer herding that Sami have done over many hundred years, longer than Sweden is old. I think we all want climate transformation. Many applaud that electrical cars may be one way forward. New mines are thus developed on the land of Sápmi, and the Swedish government has been seldomly criticized these very days by the United Nations for allowing mining on Sápmi heritage land for herding reindeer, among others. In the 2007 United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, we should be, and I quote, recognizing the urgent need to respect and promote the inherent rights of indigenous peoples, which derive from their political, economic, and social structures, from their cultures, spiritual traditions, histories, and philosophies, especially their rights to their lands, territories, and resources, unquote. This is 15 years ago. As Professor Waterhouse so strongly said in the opening plenary yesterday, we all want to enjoy the benefits of, for instance, electrical vehicles, but we do not live next to the mines that destroy our land, that pollute rivers. So here we are, commercial mining in Sweden, or Sápmi people's right to live their lives on their land. Not an easy question, or is it? Malin, what a transfer to practical things, but anyway.
Do I just pick one here? This one? Hello, everyone. Very, very welcome to Södertörn University. And I'm not going to answer Peter's question. We have to do that during the breaks and lunches, I think, and maybe even tonight. I'm very happy that you came here. And Gustav talked a little bit about this area and the new school that we're in. And our archaeologists, they actually tell us that way, way back, This was the coastline. So people entering Sweden might have actually been entering on the mountain on our compound. And since then, a lot of things has changed. But if you go back just like 70 years, now we're taking the short historical part. If you came by train from Stockholm, you had just gone past fields. There was just about nothing here but fields. There was a small mansion and some cottages, but not very much more. Then the decision was to create this hospital. And the hospital, when it was built, it was about the same land region as the old city in the city center. And now it has expanded, so it's quite huge, just the neighboring here. And then it has expanded, and we're also looking into transformation into one of the new regional city centers. So what has been the outskirts is becoming a city, regional city hub in that way. And I hope that you appreciate that you will see a little bit glimpse of that during today and also in some of the session, but not the least later on today when we will go by buses through some of the areas and have dinner at one of the places in these outskirts, like a belt around Stockholm. I will mention a few more things later on today about this, and then you can also kind of come up with questions during the day and so on, but I will not spend more time on that now. What I would like to just remember you and kind of make a point out, we have the hospital here. And here it's sound isolated, but when you're walking around, you will probably hear sirens during the day, maybe even a chopper or two going to the hospital. That is not a sign that it has happened something extraordinary. It's actually just being a neighbor to a big hospital. It's most likely, hopefully, an everyday business as usual. Gustav also talked about us having a police education here. That also means that suddenly you meet 5 police cars or police people coming in on the campus, not meaning that something has happened, but they are around. This is their campus as well. So I just want to mention that because the first time I saw 5 police cars on campus, I was kind of reacting and wondering what it was. But this is business as usual in our environment. Before I'm handing over to the panel, I also want to say just a few things of today. We have the same structure. We have a panel in the morning. Later on, we end the day also with a panel here. In between that, we have, of course, coffee breaks. We have parallel sessions before lunch and after lunch. And when the panel has finished, I will kind of try to direct you. And then you remember all the fantastic students in the green vests and the colored arrows that will help you to direct you around the university. But now I want to hand over to the first panel of today. It will be a fantastic panel, I'm sure. I'm really eager to just sit down and listen to the panel. This panel is facilitated by Annika Öhrner, who's an associate professor here at Södertörn University and director of doctoral studies in art, history here at Södertörn as well. She's interested in and is writing on art and public realm, culture transfer, radical culture of the 1960s and 70s, among other things. She's also curator, among other things, presently engaging in art collection at Södertörn University and a joint projects, like a new permanent exhibition space, exhibition space called Art Space Södertörn. That is open in now or soon. That's good. Thank you. So with this, I'm handing over to Annika Öhrner, and she will continue to present the panel and facilitate the discussions. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I would start to thank you so much for the invitation to chair this panel. And I'm looking forward to having an interesting discussion as regards the slightly little subject of the role of art in climate transformations, which will be forwarded by Sidonie Hadoux, Mats Bigert, Cecilia Sjöholm, and Karl-Anders Säfström. And it's gonna work like this. After having introduced you a little bit more, each of the panelists will make a short position comment on the wide subject, after which we will have a joint discussion. So I think this will work fine, and I'm so happy to be here with you four, because I know you have from different perspectives very much to contribute to this subject. And I will present you now first our French guest, Sidonie, who is a photographer and a filmmaker based in Lille. After studying journalism, she studied photography at the Market Photo Workshop in Johannesburg in South Africa in 2016. And you are currently enrolled in an online mentorship through the Lens Collective, also in Johannesburg. So you have a quite international activity and professional. Your current work explores the notion of landscape in the post-industrial areas of northern France, and your work can be presently really seen here at Södertörn, where you present the exhibition Living in an Oil Field, Images and Voices from Patos Marinza Oil Field in Albania, where you have cooperated, which we think is a good thing, with a researcher, Sara Persson, from Södertörn University. And I believe that in the end of this panel, we will see that there are a lot of issues and interesting connections to make between scholars and artists, and also other notions when it comes to our main subject. It's funny on a campus because things happens all the time. I was going to direct the audience to the library, but now the exhibition came to us instead, so you can actually see her exhibition in the pause outside here in the foyer. So it's a very lively and moving campus, despite the fact that we have no students at the moment. I know you are aware of that the Swedish semester has already finished. That's why it's kind of a little empty. But in spirit, we are all here. So we also have my colleague, Cecilia Sjöholm here. And you are a professor of aesthetics here at Södertörns University. You were among the group of scholars that started more or less the humanic and aesthetic and philosophic part of Södertörn University, where we have in one institution the subjects of aesthetics, philosophy, art history, practical knowledge, gender studies, and media studies. You present yourself as being a researcher dealing with focusing on the relation between art and politics in contemporary culture, and one of your most recent books are the Arendt on Aesthetic and Political Judgment, which is a very important contribution to the aesthetic field of exactly the idea of politics in public life through art and aesthetics. And you have, as we know, published extensively on aesthetics and critical theory. And your latest book, Through the Eyes and the Scar, Seeing Through the Cat, Seeing, Thinking, Writing, which you published together with Marcia Cavalcante-Schubach, also here at Södertörn, is forthcoming as well. And it looks at the relation between Descartes' thought and climate issues, which again raises the very urgent theme we have today here. And you were also one of the initiators of a new platform for research in the arts in times of climate change and societal transformation here at Södertörn University, a research platform. Then we have our second scholar, Karl-Anders Säfström, who actually also is raised here in the house in a way. You worked here from 2013, you told me, and another 4 years, but you are today a full professor of educational research and a director of the Center of Public Education and Pedagogy at Maynooth University on Ireland, as well as an adjunct professor of education at CRESI, University of Southern Australia. So you must also spend some time on flights, I guess, over the, I hope maybe you take the boat now for, you swim, good. Your latest book was published by Routledge in 2020 and has the title A Pedagogy of Equality in a Time of Unrest. And finally, in this round, you can, present these people very extensively, but I'm a little bit short here. Is Mats Bigert, who is an artist, Swedish artist, and the one half of the duo Bigert Bergström. And you have been collaborating since you were meeting at the Royal Institute of Art in Stockholm in 1986. And one of your early works were the Climate Chamber, and I sometimes whisper to people that I actually curated that in 1993. So we have some history together. Time flies. Since then, since you met at the Royal High School, you have done artworks and projects ranging from large-scale sculptures and installations. And I think that most of you are aware of the large installation tipping point that we will learn more of, I guess, in your presentation. That is presently shown at Galärparken on Djurgården. If not, you should go and see it before you leave Stockholm. And that is a part of a collaboration with Liljevalchs Konsthall, the Institute for Future Studies, and the Global Challenge Foundation. Also some kind of testimonial of how you can cooperate between scholarly and artistic foundations. So this was the start. And I will now give the word to the panelists in the same order that I presented them for a few minutes of position paper. And we should arrange so that we find the proper PowerPoints, starting with Sidonie. Welcome.
Is it working? Yes.
Well, this is also what improvisation is about. I'm sorry, but I'm not a PC guy. It's all there, but we don't have it out there. That's good. Det blir jättebra där.
So good morning. Thank you for the invitation. So the role of art in climate transformation. For me, I understood this question in terms of impact, and I'm going to speak about my work, my personal work. And the notion of impact, it's a notion that actually I'm thinking about during my short career. I started actually 10 years ago with a photojournalistic approach. as I studied journalism. So quickly, actually, I feel like photojournalism and journalism was a narrative that I was not completely satisfied with. It was maybe for me, actually, too factual. And maybe also like I was not very comfortable with this vertical approach. So it was the first shift that I operated in my narrative and my photographic work. So as Annika said, I study documentary photography in South Africa. So my first works at the beginning, I was interested in topics that mix ecological issues, the fights of communities, and social justice. And at that time, my interrogation was, how can I raise awareness to the public about these issues? And I will come back to this. So first in 2014, I've been to Albania, and you can see this work outside. And I documented the impact of the oil exploitation in Patos Marinza. And I was lucky to work with Sarah since, and these are the quotes from her dissertation. And I think it's very interesting as an artist to collaborate with a researcher. But I'm not gonna talk long about it because you can see it outside. Then in 2016, well, while I was in South Africa, I documented a drought that was occurring in Lesotho. And I realized actually that the drought was not the main problem, because Lesotho became the water tank of South Africa, but Lesotho people were not allowed to use the water that was stored by the dams. I'm not going to talk about the issues long. It's just to show you a little bit of my work. So that was documentary photography. And in 2018, I continue with this documentation of some communities, and it was I came back to Balkans in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I documented the fight of a community of women in the village of Kruščica in Bosnia, and they were also fighting against the dam construction. So we stayed like a few days with them, and we documented this fight. Okay, so this was one of my first steps as a photographer. And I have to admit that at the end, I'm not sure I raised any awareness. I even found difficulties to sell my work to French medias at that time. Every time, actually, I was feeling a little bit powerless, and I couldn't measure a real impact of what I was doing. Just one, for example, in Albania, of course, the oil exploitation didn't stop. In Lesotho, 2 other dams were built since I've been there. Maybe just the woman in Kruščica, which is a positive things they won, and the dam was not built in the village. So after this, I felt like a huge need to come back to my hometown in the north of France and to work on this on my local territory. And I wanted to do something more intimate, more personal. And so I started this new series. It's my last series of work. And I think actually that this work is kind of a therapy like my art is helping me to treat my eco-anxiety. When I came back to my hometown as a journalist also, I started a media education project with kids, and we were collecting interviews of local actors, researchers, scientists about climate change in the local area. And I start to be very anxious and almost like kind of depressed because, you know, it's not very optimistic when you're collecting data about climate change. So I needed to do something to express this eco-anxiety. And I think it's what my art helps me. So I started this series, Exploration, 3 years ago, let's say 2 years ago, maybe more seriously. Now I'm using, I'm an analog photographer, I didn't tell you before. So I'm using photography to walk about my own territory. Northern France, it's an industrial, post-industrial region. So a few words about this work maybe. So it's a visual interpretation of some ecofeminist ideas and theories. So the person I photographed explored lands that were severely damaged by the industrial industries in my region. Pollution, also war, the Second World War. We have like hundreds of bunkers around the coast. And in the images, like human beings are not the main subjects. They are sometimes small in the backgrounds or even blurred, or simply not there sometimes. And I thought these exploration as readaptations, reconciliation between the lands and human beings, and absolutely not reconquest. I try to work consciously with the concept of female gaze. We can talk about it later if you want. And as men, through patriarchy and capitalism, are mainly responsible for the destruction of the nature, I chose to photograph only women. Women bodies have been used and exploited by white and cisgender men, as have the lands. So I didn't need men in these photographs. They are already omnipresent through the shaping of the landscape. So my work is also, for me, important because I can mix two of my main interests, which are feminism and ecology. Just to finish, so as I said, it's an ongoing work. And my current interrogation is, how can I reduce my own impact on the environment? So as an analog photographer, I'm using chemicals. Some of them are toxic. I'm buying a lot of paper, inks, solvents. So now my goal is actually, I'm not throwing any slacks of paper, and I'm trying to recycle my this and doing my own paper. And with other artists in Lille, we created a collective, and we will try to create our own natural inks, for example, in order to not buy paintings or industrial material to do our work. Maybe I will finish with this. Just, I wanted also to say that I'm part of another collective, and we are trying to think about even our status, because as artists, we are not like outside of the market law, and we are in the consumption society, so we are buying materials. We have to produce art pieces, and we have to sell it, and we are to produce more and more and sell more and more if we want to live. And I think it's also a piece of reflection that I would like to share with you. Like as artists, we have to think about how we want to work in order to be. I didn't become an artist to be a businesswoman, so I would like to think about it. And I think as artists, we should think about how we want to work and how we can reduce our own impact. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Sidonie, Hadoux, for your very important positioning and ideas of what artists can choose for positions in this society. And I will continue to the presentation round with Bigert, please.
Let's see if we find another PowerPoint somewhere within the computers. go out to maybe the server. Oh, there it is. There it is. Yes, so I choose to frame my little presentation of some of our works with a series of questions, which I'm not intending to answer them in fully, but maybe we can have them to inform the discussion after our presentations. So I'll start with this. How can artistic strategies and physical embodiment of natural phenomena change our view on nature and our role in the climatic cocktail? Two people who tried this was the Swedish naturalist Gustav Kolthoff and his painter friend Bruno Liljefors, who in 1893 built the world's first ecological panorama here in Stockholm at Djurgården, where they placed the animals in the natural surroundings. And you can see that in the background from the viewing room where our artwork Inverted Space Molecule is placed 120 years later. These are experiments with making physical three-dimensional photographies reflecting entire environments. So we developed a technique where we take contemporary computer technology and combining that with old globe making. So these are examples of ways of how art and technology merge using different medias to present nature in new forms, and thus changing our perception of it. Like Sidonie, you showed your works from South Africa. It's a way of, you know, putting people in different positions and then sort of open up the discussion further. And this experiments with inverted spaces came from working with climate as architecture. And Annika mentioned this project, the climate chambers, that we did in 1994. And it was a series of chambers, interconnected rooms or sculptures that you could walk into and experience different climate extremes like wind, heat, moisture, like here in the steam chamber where you have a rusty rhinoceros pumping out 100% humidity into a space, inviting the audience to become part of a living museum. So this is taking Kolthoff's idea of the panorama, looking out into nature. This is actually creating a position where the audience becomes performers and activates the space and themselves. So for us, this question of how art can invigorate the discussion platform, for instance, of academia or science, has always been very, very present in our practice. Especially like here, we're sitting in this comfortable room, and imagine if it was minus 20 degrees, I guess our attention span would be totally different, and we probably would remember this talk much more vividly in the future. But we create these platforms like here on Sergels Torg in Stockholm, where you could lock yourself into your climate guilt in the shape of 300 kilo heavy recycled iron ball and chains in the form of carbon dioxide molecules, and thus creating this social discussion platform where we here, we were locked in for 12 hours, inviting the audience to come by, lock themselves in to open up for a broader discussion on the theme of your carbon footprint, etc. And this has been traveling further on, and then we invite other scholars, politicians, artists to lock themselves in and open up for lectures, street lectures. So a kind of active, a way of activating discussion. But what about art climate activism? Does it work? And if so, in which ways? In 2015, the highest mountain peak of Sweden, a glacier, had been melting rapidly. Over 25 years, it lost almost 20 meters. And in 2015, it was only 70 centimeters difference between the south peak here, a glacier, and the north peak, which is hard rock. And we read at the same time about this geoengineering projects in the Rhone Valley where they're covering over glacial ice to save it during summer with large swaths of cloth. So we made our own rescue blanket for our Swedish highest mountain peak and went up there to cover it, to reflect away sunshine. And in the end of the summer, when the researchers from the Tarfala research station, they make their yearly measurement in August, they realized that the peak had gained 30 centimeters. So when people asked us, so did it work? Of course, we're happy to take credit for that. But unfortunately, since then, we couldn't go back every summer to put this little blanket on top of the top. So it has melted even further. So now the Swedish highest mountain peak is not anymore the highest mountain peak. Kind of depressing, but it's a way of communicating urgent issues. But can we do that without sacrificing the freedom and independence of art? Well, this is a project we're trying to investigate this question. Here we see a climate scientist peeking into a so-called open top chamber. It's up in Abisko, the northern Swedish Arctic north, where they build these small greenhouses on the peat moss mire, which is mostly consists of permafrost. So the scientists try to study what happens if they heat a small section of the mire to see what comes up. Does the methane come up faster? Because this region is extremely threatened by global warming, since it's warming double as fast as the rest of the world. And it's also an explosive area, both internationally, politically, and also, as Peter mentioned in the beginning, the Sápmi people are being heavily affected by this. So when we saw this image of a US submarine penetrating the ice sheet of the North Pole, creating these ice shards, we thought, why not combine these ice shards with the researchers' open top chamber and make our own research station on the mire? And this is now going to become a land art project called Sensing the Arctic, which is going to be a collaboration with the researchers from the Climate Impact Research Center, also from the tourist station and Naturum, in order to create an immersive land artwork where people can go out and experience an artwork, but also get an insight into this transformation that the natural surroundings are undergoing, and also the science that's being practiced at the site. And these structures are going to be remote connected with larger broken greenhouse structures. Here's a sketch of a kind of a broken greenhouse structure placed out here outside Södertörn at the campus. So maybe next year we will see one of these here, who knows? Last, I want to finish with this image of tipping point, which Annika mentioned is now being shown in Djurgården. And if you have a chance, it's still being shown until Sunday, every full hour between 11 and 3 o'clock. And this is also a kind of instrumental collaboration between us artists and a lot of different people, among them researchers and scholars. And it's financed by Formas. It's a Swedish council, research councils, which gives money for communication projects. So this is a very good example of when art and science sort of instrumentally collaborate. So maybe this is something we could come back to later. Thank you.
Is this on? Yes. So I'm speaking here as a representative from the research platform, the newly funded research platform, the Arts for Resilient Futures, Forest, which is a new initiative for research in the aesthetic humanities at Södertörn, a platform gathering aesthetics, art history, history of literature, and philosophy. Environmental humanities is a big field, but what we would like to stress is the importance of art and aesthetics in times of transformation, given the background that today the arts and the critical strands of the humanities are mobilizing when it comes to issues of climate and environmental issues, as we have just seen the examples of here with Sidonie and Mats. This mobilization has to do with the way in which issues are treated, but also with the way in which art is produced and shown, as we have just seen. But I think that the arts must also be seen in conjunction with the way in which we talk about it, and the way in which we analyze and think about art. And this has to be done also then together with the aesthetic disciplines. It is time to wholly reconsider the impact and the importance of the role of the arts today and aesthetic experience in general in this age of transformation. So how can we do that? Well, of course, in many ways. I'm going to pick up 3 ways here that I want to stress. First of all, something that we perhaps don't talk about enough, the question of lifestyle and the role of art and the role of the humanities in producing meaning when it comes to lifestyle. Through its sheer manner of being, it offers an alternative to the bucket list oriented lifestyle that has been developing over the last few decades. And by this, I mean that people travel to sites that are now at risk, the barrier reef, the Arctic, etc., in order to see them before they disappear, thereby contributing to their disappearance ever more. And this is a paradox that is perhaps enveloping society at large, speedheading towards a catastrophe. We're not averting it, but heading towards it at an even higher speed through a certain manner of behavior. By merely existing, one can actually claim that art and the things that humanities deal with offer a sphere of meaning that may serve as an alternative to this kind of hyper-consumerism that marks society today. And this is not just speculation. The government agency of Naturvårdsverket, the agency for the care of art, so to speak, has shown that studies of mindfulness versus consumerism shows that this a way of lifestyle that uses reflection, that slows down, perhaps that thinks about the present, the environment in a more, like I said, pondful way. It's actually aiding, it's actually putting down the sort of climate, it's actually more friendly to the environment and to the climate than this sort of lifestyle on consumerism. So in actual fact, in this way, the way of using or the way of pondering the production of meaning in a different way than just sort of buying things, etc., and using this sort of bucket list oriented lifestyle can in fact help the climate and the environment. The second thing is, of course, that the humanities contributes with critical thought through formulating sharp questions and propositions. This can be done in a number of ways. For instance, issues of climate and the environment are raised together with issues of social justice, having to do, for instance, with the decolonization of aesthetic expression. A project that has to do with the attempt to find alternatives to growth-oriented capitalist expression that is rooted in the colonial project and imperialism all in all. And an example of that would be, for instance, the Agency of Forensic Architecture, which is active in showing the effect of, for instance, colonialism and issues and promoting issues of human rights. And this is a collective of artists, but are then working as activists. They have shown, for instance, the way in which Bedouin villages have been displaced through a colonial practice using the climate of the Israeli state. Other perspectives, we resort, for instance, to animal studies, post-humanist theories of the Anthropocene, philosophies of the planetary. Much is happening in the aesthetic humanities that look at the relation between humans and the environment in a new way. Here, theory and the practice of art come together. It has to do, for instance, perhaps with understanding the way in which art promotes attachment to nature, which is something that Mats has been working with a lot. And of course, understanding art has also to do with looking at aspects of visibility, the way in which it presents itself through the rhythm, forms of intervention. How does it express itself? How does it speak to us? Perhaps we don't need to look at art as something that is just constructed, through huge form, for instance, and grandiose constructions. It can also be such as the Sami monument, something that is barely visible as an imprint of herds, like remnants of sites that have been used by the Sami and that still now remain in nature, where the aesthetic expression is perhaps something that can be seen as something that is more inwards than this sort of monumental construction. So again, it is about the bond between human consciousness and nature. And then the third thing I would like to raise, art and aesthetics is as much driven by societal and natural challenges as are the natural and technology sciences. Contemporary times need visions for the future, considered from various angles. Art and critical thought in the humanities have the capacity of developing knowledge about the environmental crisis that takes the complexity of the issues into account, developing it from multifaceted points of view, which entails the analysis of existing forms of life, looked at from a future perspective, as well as understanding the historical development that has led to where we are now. So we need analysis of the present as well as of the past, sometimes look to the past perhaps in order to shape a future. And this means then that art and aesthetics may challenge the idea that the solution to the climate crisis is just a question of technological innovation. For instance, in the field of artistic research, there is now a lot of people are concerned with the fact that technological innovation to solve the climate crisis can also construe a sort of a kind of a violence done to nature, such as, the mining industry, for instance, which is now in Kalak, taking the land away from the Sami population. But it's not just a question of the mines. We have, for instance, I would like to bring up a work by an artist called Linda Maria Thompson, who has done a film called Witnessing Namfosen, which is a film where she depicts a stream, a flood, where she uses how climate-friendly power is also violating nature, and showing the history connected to this stream, the myths connected to its etc., showing its memory, and showing then how its agency is in fact ripped apart through climate-friendly innovation. And this is just one example of how I think that the humanities and the arts are very much connected and must be brought together. Thank you.
Hello? That was on. Yeah, I feel safe behind this. kind of. I won't hide. I have a manuscript. I will speak to some of the concepts I find interesting in this context. And then I will give a kind of an example in which I bring out what I find, how these concepts work in a kind of concrete, practical context. So I was asked, and thank you for being invited, of course, to speak to this and take part of this fabulous panel. The role of art in climate transformation, as I see it, is to make cuts and open. And it makes particular type of cuts. It makes cuts in what I would call the ontology of inequality. Lately, I have been thinking a lot about equality and inequality. I'm very inspired by a French philosopher, Jacques Rancière. But trying to understand inequality as not a position, but the very way in which reality itself presents itself as real. And that's particularly true in my field of education, where it's almost impossible to think education except or outside the idea of confirming or verification of an inequality of the real. So art, as well as education proper, I would say have an ability to unfold the present, to make the present show itself differently. It makes it possible to sense our own sensing as extensions of others. And there is an Italian post-humanist psychoanalytic thinker, Franco Berardi. He talked about the moral crisis of our times is our inabilities to understand our own sensing as extensions of others. And I think this is here where art as well as education, by tapping into that possible sharing sensing, where it works. So I have a manuscript. I want to leave it, but I have to go back to it. Otherwise, my monkey brain will bring us far, far away. The aesthetics, to give a kind of example of that, that's what I'm looking for when it comes to the sensibilities that both unite us and separate us. An example is the breath, which is uniquely your own, but what we all have to do. So breathing is that which unites us, but also divide us. So there is this kind of sensing in how that space is organized, which I find interesting. So lately I came from Reykjavik. Yes, I'm flying too much. I'm sorry, everyone. But I came from Reykjavik. We're presenting together with a jazz musician. We have been thinking and writing about improvisation, because improvisation is often in education and teaching the individual genius who sort of improvise, or in music. But what we are doing there and what we did was to bring out the collectivity of improvisation, not as an individual act, but a kind of heightened relationality that requires certain form of equality. So the equality of speaking beings. It is, for it to work, cannot just be one. We saw the beautiful singers here. I noticed how you were looking to each other, how you were feeding into each other, and how you smile when you sort of find ways of expressing yourself in that collectivity. So I think it's a great example of that. Individual voices who speak to each other. That is also how one is to understand teaching. And when that work in an ontology of inequality, it breaks into that inequality to verify a possible equality. That's also how it becomes political. So I want to give an example. I'm part of a sustainability network, which is an international people from everywhere. It's based in University of Ghent, but as I said, it's from many countries. It is multidisciplinary. different scholars from different disciplines, but there's also artists and activists. And when we had a network meeting in Maynooth, where I work and live, in Dublin, in Ireland, we wanted to put the finger on change and activism in climate transitions. But I think because it is, and I've heard the tendency of this, and that is also maybe a tendency when art gets involved, it's very easily get reduced to fix the problem. It became kind of instrumentalized. So let's screw up the world and then someone else fix it. But so really political problems sometimes get neutralized by being transferred into art instrumentalized or education as instrumentalized. But we saw examples earlier when that is rather the opposite, but art actually contribute to repoliticize that which is taken as something neutral and almost inevitable. So we wanted to discuss this, and in order to sort of get into the activism of it all, we invited Alva Smith, who is a prominent Irish feminist, and she was one of the leaders in the Repeal the 8 movement. I don't know if you know, but in Ireland there have been kind of a social revolution almost with the ways of social movements who have changed the whole settings of the country, even the constitution. So first was the equal marriage rights in a conservative Catholic country. And then there was the Repeal the 8. The 8 was regulating, you have to say it academically, regulating women's bodies by refusing women to have abortions. So there was a movement to repeal the 8th Amendment. So when they say in the United States you can't repeal an amendment, you can. Just look at Ireland. It's different kinds of killings, but anyway. So repeal the 8, and so this is what she told us, Alva. So what they did in the movement, they did a lot of things, but one of the things they did, they staged what can be called a kind of relational aesthetic events. They staged events using traditional forms of community gatherings and the strong Irish tradition of storytelling. The Irish can really tell stories. And they did that, when they did that, there were women who have lived through the trauma of having illegal abortions, who took the stage and they told their stories. And they spoke about their experiences. And Alva said what often happened, she said all the men cried. They come up to them and said, we had no idea, how could this happen, or whatever. So those stories spoken these stories were spoken in their women's own voices, so to speak, cutting into the absolute inequality, one in which those voices has before either been silenced or treated as noise. Yeah. So by speaking as poets, the voices of these women tapped into the sensible, the collective sensing, and shifted it. And in doing so, equality was verified. I believe that art, and in its broader sense, as well as education, does perform this kind of equality. It verifies equality. And by so doing, it cuts into and unfolds the present for new subjectivities to enter. In response to the climate crisis or catastrophe, it actually leads to, even if that's the wrong words, a kind of political subjectification in which we have to face the Anthropocene in a different way. So thank you. Sorry for being long.
Thank you very much. My first question goes to the organizers. How much time do we have for our discussions now? 12 minutes. All right. Thank you so much for your positioning. I would like to begin the discussion by posing a typical art historical reference to Kandinsky, who was visiting Stockholm in 1916. He was known already for his the spiritual in arts, and also was publishing in Swedish for the first time on The Artist. As you know, the ideas of the artist road in a future, a new spring, where the viewer through the work can make a journey into a new spirit land, which will make him richer. He was then also doing all these paintings, compositions where they were, considered abstract, quite apocalyptic fairy tales of the future. So how would we see the reference between, the relation between this typical avant-garde position of the early modernism, that where we put Kandinsky in, and his generation put the artist in center of societal and spiritual development? Is this is what we have been talking about here, or the roles that you pose to either yourself as artist or put your examples as artist in? Is that an avant-garde position? And if not, why not? Does anyone want to start? Maybe Cecilia can.
I can actually. What I think about is more the aesthetic, right? I mean, it's an aesthetic expression. Kandinsky, it's something that we take pleasure in, that we can reflect on, that we pause when we look at them. And it makes me think of Kant, who said that the way in which humans produce their works of culture shows that we fit as humans into the world. And it's kind of interesting to consider that now, since everything that has to do with climate change and the violence against nature shows that, well, we don't fit into the world. But I do think that art offers still some kind of pause, some kind of bond, so to speak, with the world, and a sense of belonging, which I think that we can regain also. Whether it's an avant-garde statement, no, I would say the contrary. It's something that is probably going back in time. Yeah, so I'd rather see the continuity between the present and the past here.
So how do you construct your idea of your position as an artist, or the artist in general, in this context?
Well, I think that also that Cecilia mentioned about offer meaning, or creating some kind of utopian movement forward to present something, other possibilities. But basically, I think it's about creating more empathy with our natural surroundings. And I think the modernistic project of constructing these cities has led us into a situation where we lost our connection to nature. But now we see a lot of movements of going back out. We're regaining knowledge about plants and names of birds and trees, and so it's, for me it's a big apocalyptic movement, in the sense that it's both an immense destruction undergoing, but it's also an awakening, that we start to realize, okay, we have to transform and change everything. So right now, this is also a feeling I have, that we also as artists have to transform our way of making things.
Right. Any comments?
No, for me, actually, it's as a photographer, it's to invite people to look at something, and to look at the territory of maybe differently. With my last series, it's to if at least they can look at their own territory in a different way and try to imagine also. I think it's about creating imaginaries also. And if the reality is not the one that we want, well, what kind of reality we would like to create, actually. It's actually what I try to do with my work.
Yeah, I do think that is the capacity, I want to connect what you were saying also, the capacity to kind of reconnect to a world that is running, you know, away from us. And where we create this world of simulacra, which is kind of more real than the real. And of course, to talk about the real is a very difficult conversation and in many ways. But I think what art helps us do by tapping into the senses, that it is actually making us impossible to look away, kind of thing. So it's make us focused on something, and by doing that, we actually have to reconsider. And I still think that there is a problem when art is used as an instrument, thereby reducing the power of art itself. So I think that it's and I think you show that in both of you in a way, in what you were exploring here, that art itself have a kind of power to open up these wounds, you know, to the real.
So you're tipping now to the role, not just of art as an example, or of open ideas and conceptions of today's society, but also the activist role that also, I mean, I know that you've been working together close with inhabitants that have very strong political problems, and you have been doing a lot of similar things as Artists in the Future, Artists for Future, that was founded in connection to Fridays for Future, which Greta Thunberg started. This is a whole field also of discourse, but mentioning the concept of instrumentalization, how is there a standard to take as an artist? How could you avoid being sort of the instrument or being asked to solve the problem that is actually a political problem? I'm working a bit with public art, where there's been a certain tendency to send artists to the suburbs to solve very clear, strong political problems that should be in the hands of the politicians, maybe, if I'm putting it in a provocative way. So do you find, is this a conflict for you, or do you see a conflict here?
It depends.
You're away.
Okay, there it is. I mean, Cecilia, you also mentioned architecture, for forensic architecture, which have been using art instrumentally to fight legal battles, but they also present it in art contexts as artworks. And for instance, this summer at Documenta will only consist of activist social groups. So I think it's a transformation of art's role. I mean, the modernistic idea that the artist should be a single genius liberated from any connections and acting free, I don't believe in that. I think you always act in an environment, political, or, you know, you're never totally free, I would say. I don't know what you think about that, Sidonie.
For me, it depends. As an independent, for example, if it depends who paid me also in a way. Like, for example, when I was in Lesotho, if I was paid by the dams company, of course, there would have been a huge conflict. And it would have been like communication and absolutely not documentary or journalism. But it happens sometimes, it depends, because when you have to fund your work, I think we have to choose carefully with who are working. For example, in Lille, my collective get paid by the municipality sometimes to do workshop. And we are doing workshop about political issues, urbanization, which is absolutely terrible in Lille. And for now, we are doing things that we want, but they say, for example, that next year they said that we're not going to be fun for the workshop. So yeah, it happened, but we have to choose carefully with who are working actually.
That's I think it was maybe a very good final conclusion. Then I think we have to wrap it up here. Choose with whom you're working. Do you want to add anything, any of you, before we close?
No, I just think it's interesting to consider the way in which art, I mean, it's not black or white, it's always built into sort of political interest, economic interest. It's very difficult to be completely free from that. But I think it does something also. For instance, when I think about the Nordic Pavilion at the Venice Biennale, which is this sort of fancy international context where you drink a lot of wine, Bellinis, whatever. But where now Sami art has been shown in a very powerful way, and they have been showing artists, the activist artists from the Sami population in the Nordic countries that have not been giving attention here in Sweden. So I think it's the art context, although it's filled with economic interest, can still be politically really interesting also for the environment.
Okay, thank you.
Tipping point, 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 tipping Heading towards catastrophe. Catastrophe. Heading towards catastrophe. Heading towards catastrophe. Catastrophe. Heading towards catastrophe.
It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be a monument. Art can be in wood too. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be a monument. Art can be in wood too. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be a monument. Art can be in wood too. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be a monument. Art can be in wood too. Art can be in wood too. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be a monument. Art can be in wood too. 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 Art can be art can be inward too. There's a power. 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 There's a
Thank you very, very much. Annika, Sidonie, Mats, Cecilia, Karl-Anders, Lone, and your, what is 5 again in English? 5 singers, the Vono ensemble. This has been a fabulous morning, a very strong and powerful illustration of the merging of art, science, activism. And I'm deeply thankful to all of you for making this happening this morning. I know that ISDRS would like to, just as a token of appreciation, would like to just tell you that they will be planting 10 trees for each of you. As a thanks for this, it's the One Planet tree that will get that task to help us out. I rest my case. Thank you.
I just agree. Big thank you to all of you. But now it's time to go on with the day. And a couple of announcements. There will be coffee and tea outside towards the left. And then we have parallel sessions. Then we have lunch. Then we will have parallel sessions again. In the breaks in between, there will also be the poster exhibition outside here. You will also have Sidonie and Sarah's exhibition outside somewhere around here, just outside. Sarah is pointing here. The posters that are posted outside here, they are also available online digitally. And you will also find more posters, only digital, on the platform. So please pass by sometime during these breaks and have a look and have a look at the digital platform as well. There was something else that I should say here. As usual, you know the routines from yesterday. I can direct out through the doors to the left and then to the left and to the right and so on. But there will be a team out there, right? There will be colored pointers to where to go. There will also be the student, Johanna, and the student teams with the green vest helping you out. So I would just like to welcome you to the coffee and tea break. And I am comfortable with there will be a support to help you to find to the sessions. And I'm also really looking forward to the sessions and the discussions now. So see you later during the day. All the best.